There is a moment in every human life when the familiar texture of the mind begins to shimmer, as if something beneath the surface is whispering that the world you've been living in is thinner than it appears. It doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself with thunder. It comes as a subtle disturbance, a quiet realization that the thoughts moving through your awareness have never truly belonged to you. You feel it first as a strange distance, like watching your mind from across a clear glass window. Thoughts that once carried the weight of identity begin to look like drifting signals, appearing in your field without your permission and dissolving just as mysteriously. And in that exact moment, the moment the illusion cracks, reality begins to rearrange itself around a new center. Most people never sense this shift. They live inside the constant storm of thinking, assuming the voice that speaks inside their skull is the core of who they are. They build entire identities around phrases that were never consciously chosen. They react to thoughts as if they were commands. They believe the narrative in their mind is theirs simply because it is familiar, because it arrived early, because no one taught them to look behind it. But when you begin to observe your thinking instead of drowning in it, a doorway opens. A fracture forms in the invisible structure you once called me. And through that fracture, an ancient truth begins to glow. If you pause, right now, truly pause, you may notice how effortlessly thoughts rise. You do not summon them, you do not craft them. They emerge already shaped, already formed, already infused with emotional tone. You only witness them after they appear. And in that witnessing, something extraordinary happens. A part of you that has never been named becomes visible. The awareness behind the thought, the space that notices, the silent presence that cannot be spoken because it exists before language. This presence isn't thinking, it is seeing. It is deeper than emotion, older than memory, untouched by the storms of thought patterns you've carried for years. And when this presence begins to awaken inside you, it feels as though the ground beneath your inner world is shifting. You realize that the voice in your mind has never been the commander of your life, only the commentator. You notice how thoughts behave more like visitors than residents, like echoes from places you don't remember walking through. Sometimes they are soft, sometimes they are sharp, sometimes they are soaked in fear or expectation, but none of them reveal what you truly are. They simply arise, perform their dance, and fade. In this first recognition, everything loosens. Your grip on your stories, your belief in your limitations, the automatic way you let thoughts sculpt your emotions. You begin to see the difference between consciousness and the content within it. And in that subtle but monumental shift, reality takes its first step toward responding differently. Because reality has never been responding to your surface thoughts, it has been responding to the consciousness beneath them, the field behind the mind, the awareness that was there before you learned your first word. And when you sense that awareness, even for a moment, you feel the truth. You were never your thoughts. You were the vast, observing presence they have always passed through. The origin of thought and the collapse of identification. There comes a point when the mind's machinery reveals itself, not as a creator, but as a narrator, a late witness to processes already unfolding beneath the surface. What you call a thought does not begin at the moment you become aware of it. Awareness is merely the final doorway it passes through. Long before you hear the sentence in your mind, long before a feeling attaches itself to the thought, long before you interpret it as me, the brain has already moved. Circuits have already activated. Memories have already been consulted. Patterns have already been predicted. The thought is delivered to your consciousness only after it has been constructed, packaged, and sent upward from the unseen depths of your nervous system. You are not the source, only the witness. This single realization is enough to shake the foundations of identity. Because if thoughts do not originate from the conscious you, then the entire structure built upon them, your stories, your self-concepts, your emotional narratives, becomes unstable. Everything you've believed about yourself, about what you're capable of, about the limitations you assumed were yours, begins to waver. The I you've held onto for so many years was woven from patterns that were never truly authored by you. They simply appeared, you believed them, and the belief gave them life. And once the illusion of authorship dissolves, something extraordinary follows: the end of blind identification. You begin to see how automatically you once fused yourself with whatever thought appeared. A fearful thought would arise, and instantly you became fear. A memory surfaced, and instantly you became its emotional residue. A limiting belief whispered itself through your mind, and instantly you shrink to fit its boundaries. Not because you consciously chose to, but because you never questioned the assumption that the thinker and the thought are the same. Yet in this stage of awakening, a clean divide emerges. You begin to sense the space between the thought and the one who is aware of the thought. The gap feels subtle at first, like a faint breath of air between two bodies that were once pressed together. But the more you observe, the wider this space becomes. You start to see that a thought can arise without defining you. It can carry a story without becoming your story. It can present a fear without creating a reality. It can whisper a limitation without establishing a boundary. This collapse of identification is not the destruction of the mind. It is the liberation of the one who has been trapped inside it. You discover that thoughts no longer have the right to dictate your emotional state. They no longer possess the authority to tell you who you are. They no longer carry the power to shape your identity without your consent. In this space, a new kind of freedom emerges, not the freedom to control your thoughts, but the freedom to stop being controlled by them. And as this shift stabilizes, as the assumption of authorship crumbles and the truth of observation rises, something subtle yet profound begins to change in the world around you. Reality, which once mirrored the noise of your mind, begins responding instead to the clarity of your awareness. The neuroscience of unseen decisions. The deeper you look into the nature of thought, the more you realize that the mind operates like a vast subterranean network where decisions are born long before they rise into conscious view. Neuroscientists have spent decades studying this hidden territory, and what they've uncovered aligns with what mystics have whispered for centuries. Consciousness is not the origin point of thought, it is the meeting point. By the time a thought enters your awareness, the brain has already done its work. Benjamin Libet's pioneering experiments revealed something astonishing. When a person intends to act, the electrical readiness potential in the brain activates before the person becomes aware of the decision. In other words, the brain begins the process without asking for your permission, and consciousness only arrives afterward to narrate the story. What you experience as a choice is actually the final echo of processes that unfolded in silence hundreds of milliseconds earlier. You do not command the thought, you greet it. This discovery unsettles the ego because it challenges the assumption of control. The I that believes it is steering the ship suddenly finds out it has been riding on the surface of deeper currents, interpreting patterns rather than initiating them. But rather than taking away power, this realization grants a different kind of clarity. You begin to see that the struggle to control your thoughts was never a battle you were meant to win, because the conscious you was never the one creating them in the first place. The brain itself is an intricate prediction machine, drawing constantly on memory, sensing patterns, and preparing responses to anticipated events. It stitches together fragments of past experiences, emotional associations, cultural influences, inherited fears, and conditioned beliefs. These threads weave the tapestry of the thought that eventually reaches your awareness. When you perceive it, it feels personal, but it is actually the product of an ancient network designed to keep you alive, not necessarily aligned, conscious, or free. But here is the turning point. While you cannot control the origin of thought, you can change the relationship you have with it. Neuroscience calls this metacognition, the ability to recognize a thought as an event within consciousness, rather than a command that defines your identity. When you observe thought instead of merging with it, something remarkable happens inside the brain. Neural pathways associated with reactivity begin to quiet. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for awareness, choice, and regulation, becomes more active. The limbic system, where emotional impulses arise, begins to soften its grip. Awareness, then, becomes the new director of the inner world, not by force, not by suppression, but by presence. The moment you witness a thought rather than obey it, the machinery that once ran automatically begins to rewire itself. New neural networks form, old patterns lose strength. The brain starts responding not just to the content of thought, but to the quality of the consciousness observing it. And this is the silent threshold where everything begins to shift, because reality does not respond to the noise of the mind. It responds to the coherence of the awareness behind it. When you stop being the puppet of unconscious processes and become the witness of them, you step into a level of influence that cannot be explained by logic alone. You begin to experience life not as the echo of your thoughts, but as the reflection of your awakening consciousness. Ancient voices that already knew. Long before neuroscience measured electrical impulses in the brain, long before psychology named the unconscious, long before modern science even questioned the nature of thought, ancient traditions were already pointing to the same revelation. The thinker is not the self, and the stream of thought is not the origin of consciousness. These ancient voices scattered across continents, separated by millennia, all pointed toward a single, unified understanding. The mind is a mirror, not the moon. It reflects, but it does not create the light. In the Upanishads, the sages described a silent witness within Atman, the observing presence that remains untouched by the fluctuations of thought. They taught that most people mistake the ripples on the surface for the entire ocean, never realizing the depth beneath. They warned that when the mind becomes tangled in its own patterns, the self forgets its nature and becomes trapped in the illusion of authorship. Yet liberation arises the moment one turns inward and sees that awareness is separate from the content that appears within it. Hermetic philosophy echoed this truth in its own way. As within, so without. As above, so below. The Hermeticists understood that thoughts were not sovereign creations of an isolated individual, but movements within a wider field. They taught that the mind is a receiving station, tuned into frequencies that shape perception, emotion, and reality. To master reality, they said, one must first master the relationship with thought, not by controlling it, but by seeing through it. The Tao Te Ching offered another perspective. Lao Tzu described the sage as one who acts without forcing, who allows thoughts to arise and fall without grasping or resisting. The sage is not defined by thought, but rooted in the Tao, the underlying flow of existence that precedes all mental constructs. To live from this place is to move with an effortless grace, to act from a deeper, intelligence that needs no thought to reveal itself. The Gnostic texts spoke of a similar insight. The mind is a veil. Behind its shifting images lies a deeper light, a forgotten knowledge of our true origin. Thought, they said, is part of the world's machinery, but the self belongs to something greater. Even Rumi, whose poetry dances between the earthly and the divine, knew the illusion well. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. He wasn't speaking in metaphor alone. He was pointing directly to the awareness that contains all experience, the vastness behind the mind's fleeting narratives. Jung, too, recognized that thoughts have their own life. They arise like autonomous beings from the collective unconscious, ancient patterns, archetypes, and instincts that shape the psyche without our permission. He understood that what we take personally often originates from something collective, something inherited, something older than our individual story. When you place all these teachings side by side, you begin to see a single truth. Every tradition, every mystic, every sage was pointing toward the same recognition. Modern science is now confirming. Thoughts arise from deeper layers of mind. They are appearances, not identity, movements, not essence, echoes, not authorship. What changes now is not the truth itself. It has always been known. What changes is your relationship with it. Once you understand that ancient wisdom and modern science are pointing to the same revelation, the illusion that thoughts define you begins to unravel. And in that unraveling, you feel something vast returning, the presence that was always underneath, waiting for you to notice it. The human struggle with the noise of thought. For most of your life, you've lived as if every thought that entered your mind carried a kind of unquestionable authority. The mind spoke and you obeyed. A fear appeared and you felt yourself contract. A memory surfaced and your body reenacted its emotion. A judgment rose and suddenly the world dimmed or brightened according to its verdict. This is the quiet struggle woven into the fabric of the human experience, the constant dance with a mind that does not rest and a self that does not realize it is free. Thoughts arrive with such immediacy, such intimacy, that they feel like truth, simply because they are familiar. A passing insecurity feels like a revelation about your worth. A reactive interpretation feels like objective fact. A single sentence in your mind can shape an entire day, even though it emerged from the same unconscious machinery that produces dreams and reflexes. Without noticing, you spend years letting these internal voices sculpt your identity and dictate your emotions. This struggle is subtle, but it is relentless. You wake up already thinking. Before your feet touch the floor, your mind has begun its commentary, worrying about what might go wrong, anticipating what people may think, replaying conversations that ended hours or years ago. The body responds as if every thought were a real event. Your heart tightens, your breathing changes, muscles contract, hormones shift. The nervous system adjusts itself to align with whatever story the mind is telling. It does not question the origin of the thought, it simply reacts. This is why life feels heavy sometimes, not because the external world is unbearable, but because you are carrying an entire universe of unexamined mental material, old patterns dressed as present reality, emotional echoes masquerading as current truth, thoughts inherited from your parents, your culture, your past selves, all merging into a seemingly coherent narrative. And because you believe these thoughts are yours, you absorb their weight, their urgency, and their fear. In relationships, this identification creates tension before a single word is spoken. You interpret tone through the filter of past wounds. You hear meaning where none was intended. You react to the thought of conflict before any real conflict exists. Your partner says something neutral, but your mind fills in the rest. From old pain. You're arguing not with the person in front of you, but with a pattern inside your own head. In moments of self-reflection, the noise becomes even louder. You try to understand yourself, but the mind offers nothing but recycled lines, judgments you've heard before, doubts that never belonged to you, conclusions drawn by earlier versions of yourself who were simply trying to survive. You try to break patterns, only to discover you're caught in loops that feel older than your memory. This is the struggle that every human carries, often silently. The exhaustion doesn't come from living, it comes from mentally reliving. The suffering doesn't come from events, it comes from the stories the mind generates around them. The confusion doesn't come from reality, it comes from thoughts that distort it before you can even meet it directly. Yet within this struggle lies the doorway to freedom. Because once you recognize that the noise in your mind is not authored by you, the entire weight of identification begins to fall away. Thought loses its throne. Emotion loses its chain of command. And a deeper intelligence, one that has been here long before the mind began speaking, starts to rise into awareness. You begin to sense that beneath the noise, there is a stillness untouched by any thought that has ever passed through you. And that stillness is the place where life finally becomes clear. The emotional frequency that shapes reality. Every thought that passes through your awareness leaves behind a subtle vibration, an emotional residue that ripples through your body before you ever speak or act. This is the hidden influence most people never notice. Emotion is not merely a response to thought, it is the energetic translation of to it. When a fearful thought arises, your chest tightens, your breath shortens, and your field contracts. When a hopeful thought appears, your body opens, softens, and begins broadcasting an entirely different signal into the world around you. You may believe your emotions are internal and private, but they are anything but. They radiate outward in measurable ways, shaping the very reality you move through. Modern research has shown that the heart generates an electromagnetic field far more powerful than that of the brain, extending several feet beyond the physical body in every direction. This field shifts according to emotional states, expanding during coherence, tightening during stress, vibrating chaotically when thought patterns are fragmented. Your nervous system becomes a transmitter, sending information into the environment around you, and the environment responds. This is not metaphysics or poetic metaphor. It is physics, biology, and the deep intelligence of the human organism working in harmony with the field of life. When you are identified with thought, especially the repetitive loops of fear, doubt, or limitation, your emotional frequency becomes unstable. You may feel like your life is unpredictable, like events happen without pattern, like relationships are difficult to navigate, like opportunities slip away, like the world is somehow tilted against you. But what is actually happening is much simpler. Your field is broadcasting noise, and life is echoing that noise back to you. Reality is not reflecting your intentions, it is reflecting your identification. This is why people can practice visualization, affirmations, or manifestation techniques without ever seeing true change. They may speak positive words, but beneath those words lies a foundation of unresolved fear. They imagine success, yet the thought, "I am not enough," continues to run in the background. They try to attract abundance while unconsciously broadcasting the frequency of scarcity. The field does not respond to the surface. It responds to coherence, or the lack of it. But when you stop identifying with thought, something remarkable happens. The emotional turbulence that once dictated your frequency begins to settle. the heart's field becomes more orderly, more harmonious. You experience moments of calm that are not dependent on external conditions. Instead of reacting to thoughts as if they are emergencies, you observe them like passing clouds. This simple shift changes the entire tone of your inner world, and with it, the electromagnetic information you radiate outward. Coherence is not achieved by controlling your thoughts. It is achieved by not merging with them. When you observe a thought without believing it, the emotion that would have been triggered never gains momentum. The field stays open, the body stays at ease. The world around you responds not to fear or tension, but to the spacious clarity of awareness. And in that clarity, life begins to reorganize. Conversations feel smoother. Opportunities appear with less effort. Synchronicities cluster around you with surprising precision. People respond to your presence in ways that seem inexplicable. The external world begins to echo the internal state, not because you forced anything, but because you stopped broadcasting the chaotic signatures of unconscious thought. This is the quiet power of emotional frequency. When your identity returns to awareness, your field becomes coherent. And when your field becomes coherent, reality cannot help but shift in response. The deep dive into the hidden architecture of thought. To understand why your reality shifts the moment you stop identifying with thought, you must look deeper than the mind's surface. Thoughts may appear simple and immediate, but their origins are layered, ancient, and intricate. They do not arise from a single source. They rise from a network of forces: memory, emotion, conditioning, collective influence, identity, belief, and the subtle language of energy. When you begin to observe these forces instead of submitting to them, the hidden architecture of thought becomes visible, and your relationship with reality transforms. Every thought begins as an echo. Your brain, like a vast library, retrieves fragments of past experience and assembles them into predictions about the present moment. What feels like a spontaneous mental event is often a memory resurfacing in disguise. Old pain disguised as caution, old rejection disguised as self-doubt, old conflict disguised as present tension. You believe you are responding to what is happening now, but in truth, you are responding to what has already happened. The mind, unless observed, does not perceive reality. It projects it. Yet, this is only the first layer. Beneath personal memory lies the inheritance of your early conditioning, the beliefs absorbed from parents, environment, culture, and the emotional atmosphere you grew up in. If a child felt unseen, the adult may carry thoughts of unworthiness. If a child felt unsafe, the adult may carry thoughts of hypervigilance. These patterns form neural pathways that generate thought automatically, triggered not by consciousness, but by survival. Your mind repeats what once protected you, even when the danger is long gone. But deeper still lies the collective field, a subtle web of shared human patterns that transmits fear, desire, belief, and expectation across millions of minds. You encounter thoughts every day that do not originate from anything you have lived. Thoughts about global fear, cultural narratives, societal expectations, and collective anxieties infiltrate your consciousness through media, conversation, and energetic resonance. They appear inside your mind, wrapped in your inner voice, yet they come from the psychological atmosphere you're immersed in, not from your inner truth. Then comes identity, the most seductive. Architect of thought, identity silently selects which thoughts gain power and which dissolve. If your identity is built around being strong, you will dismiss thoughts of vulnerability. If your identity is built around being unworthy, you will amplify thoughts that confirm your inadequacy. Identity molds perception. It filters thoughts. It strengthens the ones that match its story and hides those that challenge it. The mind becomes loyal not to truth, but to the version of you it has learned to protect. But beneath all these layers lies something even more fundamental: the emotional frequency through which thoughts are interpreted. A fearful mind sees danger in neutral moments. A hopeful mind sees possibility in uncertainty. Emotion colors thought, and thought returns the favor, creating loops that can last days, months, or years. You do not think in words alone, you think in emotion. And emotion becomes the tuning fork that attracts similar thoughts, ensuring the loop continues unless awareness intervenes. When you begin to observe this architecture, something extraordinary happens. The loops that once felt inevitable begin to reveal their seams. Thoughts lose their authority. Patterns lose their solidity. Conditioning loses its grip. The collective field becomes something you can sense rather than absorb. Identity softens into fluidity, and emotion loses its ability to control your frequency. You start to feel the truth. Thoughts do not define you, they pass through you. They are not authors, they are visitors. They are not commands, they are signals. And the moment you see this, the entire architecture begins to dissolve, not violently, not abruptly, but naturally, as if awareness itself gently unthreads the knots that once held your reality together. The mind begins to quiet, not because you force it, but because you are no longer feeding the patterns that keep it restless. The field within you grows coherent. Life begins to respond with a precision that feels almost supernatural, and you discover a power that was always there, waiting beneath the noise. The power to experience reality without the distortion of thought. The collapse of the separateness myth. There is a moment in the inner journey when the walls that once separated you from your thoughts, your mind from the world, and your consciousness from the greater field begin to dissolve. It does not happen through intellectual effort. It happens through a quiet recognition, a realization that feels less like learning something new and more like remembering something ancient. You begin to sense that the boundary between inner and outer was never as solid as it seemed. The thinker you believed yourself to be begins to fade, and in its place, a different truth emerges. Consciousness is not contained within you. You are contained within consciousness. At first, this realization feels disorienting. You spent your entire life believing thoughts were private events, generated by a self-sealed inside a single mind. But the more you observe your thoughts without identifying with them, the more you feel something spacious behind them, something that does not belong to the personal narrative at all. Thoughts begin to feel like waves, arriving from a wider ocean, not the output of an isolated machine. Some thoughts feel ancient, some collective, some patterned, some foreign, and you begin to question the belief that all thinking originates from the isolated me. This marks the collapse of the separateness myth, the belief that consciousness is divided into millions of tiny containers, each producing its own thoughts independently. When you relax into awareness, you sense the opposite. Consciousness feels continuous, like one vast field expressing itself through countless variations. Your thoughts, emotions, and impulses become movements within that field, not possessions of an individual identity. You do not lose your sense of self. Instead, the self expands beyond its old boundaries. You begin noticing how your inner world synchronizes with the outer world in subtle ways. A thought arises moments before someone speaks it aloud. A feeling of tension appears hours before a challenging moment. A wave of insight arrives seemingly from nowhere, only to reveal itself as precisely what the moment required. These experiences are not coincidences. They are glimpses into the interconnected field that underlies all minds. When you are no longer consumed by personal thinking, you begin to perceive the deeper currents that connect all beings. The world around you starts to feel less like a stage and more like a living network, porous, responsive, fluid. The division between my mind and the world out there softens. You sense that your inner state shapes the environment, and the environment shapes your inner state in return, not through mystical imagination, but through the direct experience of resonance. When you are coherent, life moves smoothly. When you are fragmented, life mirrors that fragmentation. You realize reality isn't separate from you, it is participating with you. This dissolving of separateness is not an escape from individuality, but a deepening of it. You become more authentically yourself when you realize you are not alone inside yourself. You are part of a larger consciousness that has been expressing itself through your eyes, your thoughts, your breath, your heartbeat since the moment you arrived on this earth. And once you see this, the world stops feeling like something happening to you. It becomes something happening through you, an unfolding collaboration between your awareness and the infinite field from which all thought arises. In this recognition, duality loses its authority. The boundary between inner and outer dissolves, and the self you once protected begins to open, allowing life to move through you with an act of the self, intelligence far greater than thought could ever contain. Living from awareness instead of thought. When the center of your life shifts from thinking to awareness, everything begins to reorganize itself from the inside out. This shift is not dramatic or loud. It arrives quietly, like a subtle turning of the inner axis. You begin to move through your days with a different kind of presence, less entangled, less reactive, less bound by the stories that once dictated your emotions. Life does not suddenly become perfect, but it becomes remarkably clear. You no longer experience reality through the haze of unconscious thought. You meet it directly, moment by moment, without the distortion of inherited patterns. Living from awareness does not mean abandoning the mind. It means seeing the mind for what it truly is, a tool, not an identity. Thoughts arise as they always have, but now they pass through you rather than becoming you. When a fearful thought appears, you notice its texture but do not merge with its meaning. When a judgment arises, you sense its sharpness but do not assume it reflects truth. When an old belief surfaces, you feel its pull but no longer follow its direction blindly. You become the witness, not the captive. This shift changes your emotional landscape in ways you could never force intentionally. Instead of being pulled into emotional spirals, you feel emotions move through you like waves, intense but temporary, vivid but not defining. You begin to notice that most emotional suffering was not caused by the emotion itself, but by the thought you believed about it. Fear was not the problem. The story of what fear meant was the problem. Sadness was not the burden. The narrative of what sadness said about you was the burden. When awareness remains present, emotions soften, breathe, and release without leaving scars. In your relationships, the difference becomes unmistakable. You listen without preparing your response. You speak without defending an identity. You allow disagreements without collapsing into insecurity. You no longer feel the need to control how others see you, because the self they are perceiving is not the one you cling to anymore. And as this spaciousness grows, something beautiful happens. People feel safer around you. They feel seen instead of judged, met instead of managed, understood instead of interpreted. Connection deepens because presence deepens. In your work and creativity, flow replaces force. When you move from awareness, you are no longer trying to prove yourself through achievement. You act from alignment rather than pressure. Ideas come more naturally. Opportunities appear with less resistance. You recognize when effort is needed and when rest is wisdom. Productivity becomes effortless because you are no longer working to secure your identity. You are simply expressing what wants to emerge through you. Even your relationship with challenge transforms. Difficult moments do not feel like personal failures, but like experiences passing through the field of your awareness, each one carrying information, each one dissolving when its signal is received. Life stops being a series of threats to your sense of self and becomes a series of invitations to expand into a deeper state of being. This is what it means to live from awareness instead of thought. You begin to inhabit your life rather than survive it. You begin to participate in reality rather than battle your mind's version of it. The world feels less heavy, not because circumstances change instantly, but because the one meeting those circumstances is no longer burdened by the illusion of being the thinker. You become grounded, steady, clear, not because you force clarity, but because awareness itself is clear by nature. And from this place, reality begins to feel strangely alive, as if responding to a deeper frequency within you. Synchronicities appear. Conversations unfold with surprising precision. Paths open where they were once blocked. This is not magic, it is resonance. When you stop identifying with the noise of the mind, you begin broadcasting the coherence of awareness, and life responds accordingly. When reality finally responds, there comes a moment soft, unmistakable, and profoundly intimate when you realize that reality is no longer responding to your thoughts, but to the quality of awareness behind them. It feels like the entire fabric of your life subtly exhales, releasing the tension that once filled every experience. The world doesn't change in a sudden burst of miracles. It shifts in quiet, precise alignments. You begin to notice that the timing of events feels more fluid, that conversations unfold with uncanny clarity, that opportunities appear with an almost deliberate intelligence. This is the moment reality starts responding not to the noise of your mind, but to the coherence of your being. What has changed is simple. You are no longer living as the thinker. You are living as the awareness in which thinking appears. And reality has always responded to this deeper field, not the frantic stories that rise and fall within it, but the steady frequency of the space that holds them. When you rest in that space, even for a breath, you transmit something different into the world. You are no longer emitting the static of fear, the tremor of doubt, or the tension of old narratives. You are broadcasting something clear, steady, and unmistakably alive. This shift is not about controlling your experience. It is about dissolving the layer of illusion that once filtered your experience. You realize that most of your suffering came from reading your thoughts as if they were truth, from interpreting every emotion as a personal message, from believing that life was shaped by the stories your mind told. When that identification falls away, what remains is a spaciousness that doesn't resist reality, and because it doesn't resist, reality flows. You start to feel guided by something deeper than preference or fear. Decisions that used to feel heavy begin to arise with clarity. Moments that once overwhelmed you now feel manageable, even meaningful. The past loses its authority, the future loses its grip, and the present moment becomes a living, breathing field of intelligence. Life stops feeling like something you must wrestle into shape. It begins to feel like something unfolding through you, shaped by the frequency you inhabit, rather than the thoughts you believe. In this state, you discover that Synchronicity is not coincidence. It is communication. Life is speaking in patterns and timing, in symbols and alignments, in the invisible choreography that becomes visible only when the mind is quiet enough to notice. What once seemed random now feels intentional. What once felt chaotic now feels interconnected. You sense that you are part of a larger movement, one that was always here but obscured by the noise of unexamined thought. And as this recognition deepens, the final illusion dissolves. The belief that consciousness is something you possess. You see that consciousness is what? You are vast, aware, and intimately connected to the reality that reflects it. The personal story continues, but it no longer defines you. Thoughts continue to appear, but they no longer command you. Life continues to unfold, but it no longer feels separate from the awareness witnessing it. What remains is truth, not conceptual, not philosophical, but experiential. A truth that rises quietly in the space where the mind once shouted, "You were never the thinker, you were the presence behind it." And the moment you live from that presence, reality begins responding to a coherence it has been waiting for all along. This is the remembering. This is the shift. This is the moment consciousness meets itself through you. This is Quantum Quest, where consciousness becomes the experiment.